Hi, my name is Trevor New. I'm a violist who uses Ableton Live for performance, and I'm going to be going through how to create a really simple track so that you can use your instrument with Ableton Live in performance. So the first thing is I went and I opened up Ableton. When you do that, you get 2 MIDI tracks and 2 audio tracks. Go ahead and delete the MIDI tracks by highlighting them and hitting delete, and then maybe leave yourself 1 audio track. I've gone ahead and renamed this by going here, and I just typed in, I'm going to go ahead and retype that in capital letters, rec, or if you do Command R, that also allows you to rename tracks. We're going to move pretty quickly here, so I'm going to do Command T to create a new audio track, or if you'd like to do that via the menu, you can go Insert Audio Track here, and you can see the hotkeys right next to it. On a Windows computer, it's going to be very similar, so and you'll be able to see that through the menu as well. So I'm going to go ahead and change the color of this by right-clicking on the track, and I'm going to select green if I like green. And I'm going to do Command R, rename again, and this is going to be Viola. Input. So this is the input track, and if I come down here, what I've done is I've changed this to resampling. So what that's going to do is it's going to take whatever is coming out the master track, and then it's going to bring it back here to record it. And I have it record enabled, so I'm going to, I could record here if I wanted to, but if I go here, by hitting tab, that switches to arrangement mode. Hit tab again, you go back to session view, right? So session view, arrangement view, not mode. And it's going to start right at the beginning because I've already hit stop here, so let's hit record. And now that's going to be recording. So I'm going to toggle back, hitting the tab key, and back in session view. So the way this works is you need, for an acoustic instrument, you need a pickup or a microphone. If you take a look at my instrument, I have a pickup right here that actually attaches inside the bridge. A little bit, it gets wedged in there. This is the Schertler Stat V. And this is for violin, viola, cello, I believe, and bass as well. It has a different name. It's the Stat V for violins and violas, and it's something else for cello and bass. But what's really great about this setup is this preamp. Now the pickup is great too, but the preamp that comes with this costs about 4 times or 3 times as much, and it's really worth it. It basically takes the sound of a pickup and somehow transforms it into something that's a little bit more acoustic sounding as it goes into your audio interface, which is, this is mine right here. This is a Thunderbolt interface. It's the Resident Audio T4. Basically I got it because it's super fast. It's a Thunderbolt interface, which means it can transfer, the data speed is generally higher going into the computer. It does use a little bit more power, so that's something to think about, and because it uses more power, it can make your computer a little bit hotter, which then can actually cause your CPU to lower its speed a little bit. So those are always things to consider. For me, this works pretty well. So in order to use these things, you want to go up to Live, go to Preferences, and then make sure that you have this selected. So I've already done that. So I have input, T4 input selected here, and the output selected here. If you have a number of inputs, like the T4 has 4 inputs, so you want to select all the mono inputs and all the stereo inputs. You can hit OK, that's already selected. So any input I use now is great. Good to go. And outputs, I have everything selected for the outputs as well. You may not need all of them. A lot of times if you're playing with one instrument, you're just going to use 1 and 2 for the stereo outputs. And if you're mixing a certain way, you may want to actually use the mono outputs in that case. So sample rate, best to keep this the same. High quality is good. Yeah, this is your sample rate here. Now, I like to keep this at 44.1 because it lets my CPU breathe, my processor and my computer. If you use Adobe Premiere, that's going to be in 48. It is a little more difficult to record at a 48 hertz sample rate versus 44.1. It just takes more power. It's really nice, but I like to keep it at 44.1. You can convert it later. It's not so bad. But yeah, it's kind of up to you. See if your computer can handle that. Next is the biggest thing to consider when you're doing live performance, and that is latency. So that is the amount of time it takes for the sound from your instrument to go into the pickup through a preamp or not, into your audio interface, into your computer, back out of your computer to the audio interface, and then to your speakers. So right now I have it set at 256 samples, which gives me 5.8 in, 5.8 out. You add that up, and you get your overall latency. So now this is a little over 10. A 15 millisecond round trip for your latency is perceptible for your audience. And it is a pain to play. It's kind of a pain to play at 15 milliseconds as a performer. At least it is for me at this point. I think when I started out, my interface was a little bit slower, so I just kind of worked with it. If you're doing any kind of looping, that is that's really difficult to deal with. So now, what I'm able to do with a Thunderbolt interface is when I bring it down to 128 samples, I get this, which is we're like a little bit below 6, right? Having a latency of 6 milliseconds, that is not really perceptible. Anything under 10 is difficult for a performer to really notice, and the audience doesn't notice it at all. It's really great to basically hear your sound immediate as it comes out of a computer. If you're using pedals, that's not going to really be an issue, and that may be kind of that's probably one of the things about using a computer that can be a little bit cumbersome. But once you consider what the options are, it's really easy to figure out a way to work with it and around any sort of latency issues. I haven't had to think about that in quite a while. You solve it once, it's fixed. So, yeah, so let's get back to working with our sound here. So right now, there's a little meter saying that there's sound coming in, but we don't hear it. So the reason for that is this monitor. So if we select auto, what that does is it will automatically switch between something being played and something being played through a clip here, right? So it'll switch between my sound and a clip. If I record enable it, now I have sound, right? But what I like to do is actually just do a monitor in, sorry. Select monitor in, which just has my sound going through at all times. I'm not going to be playing any clips through this, so it's good to just select monitor in. If I'd like to record this track as I'm playing, just record enable it, right? And right now, I believe if I go back here, yeah. So the times whenever I record enable this, I just hit tab in order to get over here. If I record enable this, it will start recording now. See? So let's toggle back, hitting tab again. So we're recording everything that's coming out of this track. It looks like, yeah, that's a pretty good sound. Coming out of the pickup, really like it. Let's see if we can EQ it a little bit. So we're going to change the sound a little. I'm going to go with EQ8, which is going to give me a few more options. So let's select here, or double click, and EQ8. Alright, so I'm going to check all these boxes at the bottom so that I have, you know, all my tools available here, and I'm going to make this a little larger so it is easy to see. So right now I have a little bit of sound coming through just generally, so it may be that this is turned up a little bit too high. Let's bring it all the way down, and I'm going to bring it up a little bit. So there's, yeah, so this has a little bit of noise. Let's turn this down. Good. And yeah, there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shave off the bottom here. Let's lower that. And even as I'm speaking, some of the sound is coming through. So part of that is actually because I'm speaking. So if we take a look at the profile of the sound coming through, we have a lot of low end. So that's a natural thing when you have a pickup. So we're just going to take off a bunch of that. We really don't want like a ton of low sound coming through. So there we go. So that kind of warms things up a little bit, makes it a little bit more dynamic, and a little bit still pretty resonant, but it's gonna be a little bit clearer now. And with that clarity, we're gonna raise the highs a little bit. So these are really high, like beyond our notes. Like if I play, watch these peaks right here. You can see the individual notes come up. Right? So that right there, you see that highest peak? That's most of where that note is coming out. And then all of the other ones above that are the partials and the overtones. So if we turn up the overtones just a little bit here, so we bring that area up, that's going to make that nice and sharp. So a really clear, clean sound that is still very reverberous, right? Good. And we took a little bit off the top here as well because we don't want it to be too harsh. So I'm going to bring that to about, yeah, let's say 14 kilohertz here. So good. And let's bring this back to normal. Just hitting this arrow here will, you know, enlarge or make that smaller. I don't know what the opposite of that is. Good. So this sounds pretty good. So now we have a really good clean sound right now. But what we kind of want is to also have the sound of an acoustic instrument, right? Which is being played in a space. So your room is, you know, if you're playing acoustically, the room is also a part of your instrument, right? So let's see if we can create that by coming over to our reverb return. The way Ableton works is just like a mixer, really. You can, if you turn up these faders labeled A and B in this case, this fader will send sound over to this first, what's called a return track, and we'll get to hear what's inside of this track, which is some reverb. So if I go ahead, I'm going to turn this up. I'm going to turn it up all the way just so that you can actually hear the reverb a little bit. You hear that? You can hear a little bit of a tail. I'm going to turn up the decay time, like a lot. My computer has some information for me. So yeah, so you can sort of hear, yeah, reverb, you know, is used, you can hear that it's used in music pretty much across the board. There's no music that doesn't have some kind of reverberousness in it, right? It can be overused. So if you're playing something fast, so you kind of can't hear any of the definition of what I'm doing because there's so much reverb. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down the decay time a lot. So let's just say, let's try 2.5 seconds. Kind of already adjusted some of these things. So the shape has to do with the reverb tail, and this is going to kind of pull it a little bit shorter. Reflect and diffuse basically give, reverb a little bit of body. There's a little bit more, literally what it means, reflections and diffusion. That has to do with when, like if you're at a concert hall, you have your surfaces that reflect, and then the multiple places where it can break apart, diffusion. When you turn that up, you turn both of those things up, that is the sort of the body of the reverb, is a really good way of thinking of that. Also in these concert halls, when you have a viola playing, you're not necessarily going to get a lot of low end. So this was off before. I went ahead and clicked this on, and I just took a little bit of the low end out of here, and I think I'm going to lower the high, this high part just a little bit. And yeah, I took down the shape a little bit. So my goal for my sound is to have a clean sound, right? So I have the dry sound, which is just what's coming out of the viola input, and then I have the reverb. So the goal is to have a good dry sound, and then something that is reminiscent of like a small, somewhat reverberous room, right? So nothing too intense where it's just going to ring forever, but something that says there's a little bit of space and gets a little bit of that warmth from that. So let me try this. I think, yeah, so I turned up the reflection and reflect and diffuse, which is good. Density also does that, and high quality is going to make that sound a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer, a little more natural. So this is a lot closer to what I'm interested in. It still sounds like there's a little bit too much here. So I'm going to turn this down a good third or so. Good. So this is what I like. I think this sounds pretty accurate for me. Let's see how our recording situation is going. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to record my playing here. And I'll hit play. Let's make sure this is recording just to double check. Always good to be careful. So we don't hear anything right now, right? If anybody remember, we have to select monitoring. So if it's in, I'm only going to get my sound going through. So I need to hit auto. And then now it will automatically switch. If I stop this, it goes right back to my playing. If I hit play again, it goes right back to that. And let's check here. So what that'll be doing as well is it will be recording here as well. Right? So what I'm doing now is I'm actually listening to see if I like the reverb that I just made, because you really can't hear how much of it there is if you're while you're playing. So it's important to record yourself and then listen and see if it's what you want, because this is what's coming out of the speakers. Sounds pretty good. I'm going to turn it down just a tiny bit. Let's see. So that's nice and low. Let's see what happens if we turn up the decay time a touch. I'm always a little apprehensive to do that, because that means that things can bleed together a little bit. Good. And another important part of this Reverb plugin is the pre-delay. So pre-delay is the amount of time before the reverb starts working. So if we turn this, what's really easy to hear is this working. So whenever there's a sound, this is the amount of time before the reverb goes, that takes that sound and throws it into this room that you've created. So let's turn this back up. So if I turn... So if you notice, when I have the pre-delay turned up, it actually adds a little bit of definition to even something that sounds a little bit muddled. You get that just little bit of extra start of the note in order to hear what's happening. But it's way too much. I'd like to be able to... Yeah, I think this is pretty good. Maybe a little more now. Let's hear some pizzicato. Yeah, I think that works. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop this track. Let's make sure we're still recording. Good. So this is a basic input track for the viola. You can do the same thing for acoustic guitar that has a pickup on it, or other electric instruments. It's a different style, but it's the same approach. You can do the exact same stuff that I just did. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to add some crazy effects. And you can see kind of the advantage to maybe using a pickup versus a microphone, right? There are some definite advantages to both. If you can use both, that is pretty ideal. In that case, if you're able to use both, what you'd probably want to do is actually have the mic running through this dry sound, just like this, and then have the pickup with a separate input, of course, just the same, maybe in the same style, and going to your effects. And I'm going to show you why you want to use your pickup for effects instead of a microphone. So what we're going to do is we're going to now add some effects over here. We're going to use sends, just like we have been. So right now we already have a delay that Ableton provides for us right when we start. And I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So right now it's, each of these feedbacks are going to sound the same. I'm going to switch it so that it's 3 against 4. And let's go ahead and turn this up just so that we can hear what it sounds like. So right now you see it says sync right here, and that means it's working with the metronome speed. So if I turn on the metronome, it should line up really well. that's pretty fun. But what I'd like to do is make this a little bit more interesting. Let's click here and we're going to turn off sync. I'm just going to turn this to a random number. Let's see what this sounds like. So it sounds a little bit disjointed, right? But keep in mind, if you're making a track that already has like a really strong beat, having maybe one part of the delay that's on time and then another part that could be doing something kind of crazy. Like we could turn this all the way up. Let me see. Yeah. So 5 seconds is a long time, as we can see. But that can add a different character to a track. So don't be afraid to experiment with something that sounds maybe a little bit disjointed like this. What I'm going to do is actually, let's take the time out. I'm going to put this at a maybe medium, let's say 300 and maybe 343 or something like that. Or actually, let's make them match so you can hear the difference. Let me see, did it already do it? Yep, it did. Yeah, so they're both at 306, right? Let's hear that. All right, nothing too crazy. If you go ahead and change this just slightly so that they're not quite in time, 346 milliseconds versus 306, that is actually not a huge difference time-wise, but it adds a certain character. So when they're pretty close together like this, let's even make them a little bit closer. It creates, right, it can create a sense of space. So delay is different than reverb, of course. Reverb is an actual space and it has diffusion, reflection. Delay is just having your sound delayed in certain increments, right? I'm going to add another element to this, which is ping pong, which is actually going to send the sound back and forth from the left to right channel, as well as do what we already have here. And now listen to this. And if I bow, yeah. So when an effect is working really well, it's sort of hard to not keep playing. I was kind of enjoying that. So this is a delay setting that I might use. Mine in my setup is a little bit different for many different reasons. A little bit longer. There's a little bit, it's a little simpler too, actually, because I like to apply it to a lot of things. So that's a pretty cool delay effect. Let me show you one more thing, and this is kind of a more complex effect, something that maybe might be reminiscent of a pedal that has a lot of characteristics with it, but it's something that you can make in Ableton. So I'm going to come up to this area over here. This is where your return tracks are. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say insert return track, which you can also do right here if you go to create. Right, and under this return track, I'm going to use an effect that I use in my sets. So I'm going to go to user library and Vox Viola. Let's go to return tracks, And so I've added this really huge effect here in my as a return track, and I'm going to go ahead and turn up the viola send of that. Everything's, you know, at about 50%, all these things. I'm going to turn up the volume boost quite a bit just so that you can hear it, and let's listen. So it kind of is creating a lot of different sounds at the same time, if you can't tell. And so I have a few controls that react to my MIDI controller that I have that's a foot controller. So it's right here, this panning oscillator. So that creates some panning going back and forth from left to right, and eventually faster and faster. So it's kind of a nice thing. And when you work with these kinds of effects, it just, you know, it really warms things up, and it's, I don't know, I find it to be really enjoyable if you can spend time making these things. So this I made a long time ago. It may not be the most efficient one. It's giant. But yeah, I think my CPU's gone up a little bit. You want to keep an eye on this meter when you're making effects like this in the upper right corner. But yeah, these are all kind of the baseline, you know, Ableton plugins. Ableton has awesome plugins in it. So if you buy Ableton, get the suite if you can. You get all the stuff that is really, really useful. And you can buy other plugins too. There's like lots of great plugins around, but if you get the suite, you're gonna definitely have a lot to work with and a lot to learn from too. Ableton has spent a ton of time creating these effects and creating these plugins to be something that is, you know, as close to the analog versions of these devices, but also with kind of their own spin on it. They really do have their own character. So yeah, if you can afford this, if you can afford the suite, get the suite. It is about $700. But you can always start out with something a little bit cheaper, like the standard version, and I think there's a third one in the middle. Try out Ableton for free for, I think it's 30 days. They have a free trial. And when you do the trial, you can actually get all the things in the suite. So it's pretty cool. Any case, back to this. So I have this effect, and why don't we just try adding the delay with it? Play the bow. How about this? Since I have this great plugin that it's an octave down, or it has the option of doing an octave down. It's called pitch proof. It is, you want to always put this inside of the limiter here. It is actually free. Here it is. And we want to select for pitch here. We want to do octave down. I'm going to leave it 50-50, leave some of my dry sound. Don't need a tuner. We do want it to come out stereo, even though it actually is coming out mono, so not really a big thing. Transient fix, let's leave that on. Don't need to detune, but maybe we could detune up a little bit. That creates, when there's a slight detuning that between two different notes, that creates a little bit of space, right? That's what we're hearing a little bit when we're in space, is like slight shifts in intonation while it doesn't sound out of tune. So let's hear what it sounds like now with that octave down. There's a little bit of Bach there. Maybe we could turn down the delay a little bit, right? Yeah, so there's some nice sounds there. So there's a lot to think about. Whenever you're working on your computer, using any sort of DAW or digital audio workstation, or whenever you're messing around with pedals, make sure that you experiment. Don't worry about doing anything wrong. You know, the more information you have, the better. Making mistakes is a part of that. And also, nice thing about Ableton is you can just start with a new set. You can just delete what you did. If it's something horrible is happening with that, just hit delete. It's gone. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So yeah, make sure you experiment, and I hope you have a lot of fun and this video was helpful. If you liked it, please subscribe, and you know, hit me up on Instagram. I'm Vox Viola, VOXVIOLA. A lot of interesting things on there. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me either on Instagram or on YouTube as well. I'm happy to help answer some questions, and I also do give lessons for more in-depth discussion on all these different topics that I kind of very quickly covered here. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon.